Hello everybody and welcome to part 9 of my FTC programming tutorial videos. In this video we're going to talk about deadline and we're going to talk about toggling motor drive power. So deadline in FTC is just simply a timer. It's going to allow us to prevent certain things from happening multiple times without a certain delay passing. And then toggling the drive power is something I mentioned in the last video. There's two ways I kind of like to control the drivetrain in terms of its maximum power output. You can do it on a sliding scale with pulling in a trigger, or you can do it with pressing a button to toggle between a high power and a low power speed. Say you want a more stable drive power, so you can kind of slide around and you don't want to think too much, but all of a sudden you feel like you need to get to the other side of the field as fast as you can. You hit one button, the nitrous kicks in, and you're off to the other side. So this is going to be pretty basic, so let's get into it. Now, the very first thing we need to do when we work with deadline is we need to import two things. We need to import deadline itself. So that's going to be org first inspires FTC robot core internal system deadline. And then the second thing we need is we need to import the time units from Java. So that's going to be Java util concurrent and time unit. Don't worry, it's going to be really straightforward to work with these things. It's not going to be that difficult at all. So in making a deadline, we have to create a deadline object, and I'm just going to call this deadline for the purposes of this. And in order to create a deadline, we have to use this kind of syntax, which is, I believe, the first time we've seen something like this. But all this is doing is it's just creating a deadline. So these are the kind of options that we can provide to it. It needs two things. It needs a number, so the actual delay we want, and it wants the units for that delay. So for this example, I'm just going to choose 500, and I'm going to make it 500 milliseconds. Now that's pretty straightforward, I would hope. This number is just the number of milliseconds that this deadline or timer, so to speak, is going to run on. And then in order to actually use it, there's two functions that we care about. There is has expired, which is just checking, has this delay passed yet? And then there's .reset. So every time this delay has passed and we do an action that we want to associate with that delay, we're going to choose to reset the deadline so that that action can't take place again. So in using this in actual code, we're going to almost always check if the deadline has expired inside some sort of if statement. So in this case, we're going to check if the deadline has expired. Now, we might also add additional checks here. So maybe we want this deadline to be associated with a gamepad button, which we will do in a second here, or something like that. But for now, I'm just going to continue and kind of write this out. So if our deadline has expired, then do something, and we'll kind of do something under this code, and then reset the deadline. So to reset the deadline, it's going to be real simple. It's just deadline.reset. And so now, whenever we have our deadline expiring, it's going to do whatever is inside this if statement, and then it's going to reset itself, meaning this if statement is not going to be able to be true until whatever delay we put in here has passed. Now, for the documentation for this, I was unable to find the official kind of GitHub Pages documentation. I did, however, find a very old repository that happened to have the internal system source code from the FTC robot controller code. Now, this could be different now. I'm not going to give any guarantees that this is the actual code that deadline runs on, but this is more or less what it is. There's not any documentation or explaining what any of this is, but essentially all we're using is we're creating deadline with a duration and a time unit, and we're using reset to kind of reset the timer, and we're using has expired to determine if the timer has run out or not. You can kind of look through the other functions in here that are available to you and see if any of them may be of use. Now that we've successfully done that, let's move on to using the deadline in order to control an input for our gamepad. So in this example, I'm going to use gamepad A as kind of a toggle between a lower drive power and a higher drive power. So let's kind of set that up. The first thing I need to do is I need to get the imports that I need. So I need deadline, of course. And I need Java's time unit. All right, so now that we have that, I'm going to create my deadline, and I'm going to call this gamepad rate limit. This is kind of a standard name that you'll find. This is just kind of the standard that I like to go by. And then we need to create a new deadline, and now we need to decide what kind of delay we want. Now, I'm going to give the example of 500 milliseconds or half a second. You can obviously change this if you want. It's going to kind of depend on how fast you want to be able to switch between these two drive powers. All this is doing is ensuring that whenever we press the button on our controller in order to switch the drive powers, it doesn't toggle back and forth very quickly. And so sometimes what will happen if you don't do this and you just have a simple if statement that says, if we press this button, then switch the two drive powers, what will happen is you'll go to press that button one time and it'll actually trigger multiple times. And so sometimes you'll press that button and nothing will happen, when in reality it went through the loop twice in that time, and it found that you were pressing the button both times that it looped through, and so it didn't actually change your drive power. So that's what this deadline is doing. I'm going to give the example of 500 milliseconds. You can obviously change that if you want something different. Now that we've done that, we have to establish what we want our low drive power and our high drive power to be. I'm going to make low power let's do 0.6, and I'm going to make high power 0.8, and then we need a variable for our current power, and I'm going to make that low power. All right, so now that we have that, excuse me, every loop we need to check whether or not our deadline has expired, and then we need to check if we're actually pressing the button in order to switch these powers. So inside this if statement, I'm going to check if gamepad rate limit has expired, and I'm also going to check if gamepad1.a is being pressed. So in this particular example, I'm going to use the A button to kind of be the toggle between our low and our high drive power. You can obviously change that to be whatever you want. So now, if we have pressed if both of these things are true, so we can change the drive power and we're actually pressing the button. If our current power is equal to low power, then we want to set our current power to be high power. And if otherwise, we want our current power to be set to low power because we're already set to high power. And then at the end of all of this, we, of course, need to reset the gamepad rate limit. All right, now that we've done that, we have to do the final step, which I'm sure you could probably guess, and we have to actually add in the power to our section of code where we set our drive power. So now that we've done that, believe it or not, that is all we need to do. So now we have a toggle between low drive power and high drive power using gamepad A, and we've done this using a rate limit so that when we hold down our button for maybe 5 milliseconds longer than we should have, it doesn't loop through the program twice and you actually get the output that you want to have. All right, let me know if you have any questions and if you found this helpful.